Hello, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to explore the darkness between the stars, the places where human understanding falters and something else, something ancient, something incomprehensible, waits in the void. Get comfortable. Adjust your pillow, pull your blanket close, and let your body sink into the mattress beneath you. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Take a deep breath in through your nose, hold it for a moment, and release it slowly through your mouth. Good. We are not alone in this universe. That's not a comforting thought when you really consider it. Somewhere out there, in the vast cosmic ocean, other minds exist. Other intelligences. Other things. And sometimes, those things find us. Sometimes, they want something from us. And sometimes, we're left wondering if we were ever truly safe in our little corner of the galaxy. Tonight's stories draw from the deepest wells of cosmic horror, tales of encounters with beings beyond our comprehension, phenomena that defy our physics, and humans who looked up at the stars only to find the stars looking back. These are stories designed to unsettle, to create that perfect tension that eventually releases into the deep, dreamless sleep we all crave. As we journey through these tales, let yourself feel the fear, the wonder, the existential dread. It's safe here. You're warm, you're comfortable, and these stories are just that, stories. But they tap into something primal, that ancient fear of the unknown that helped our ancestors survive. And paradoxically, allowing yourself to feel that fear in a safe environment actually helps your body relax, helps your mind process the day's anxieties, and prepares you for deep, restorative sleep. The universe is vast. Incomprehensibly so. There are more stars in the observable universe than grains of sand on all of Earth's beaches. More galaxies than we can count. And in all that cosmic expanse, the statistical probability of us being alone is essentially zero. So the question isn't whether intelligent life exists elsewhere. The question is, what happens when we meet them? What happens when they meet us? Before we begin our first story, let's take one more moment to settle in. Feel your heartbeat. Notice how steady it is. Feel the weight of your body against the bed. Notice how gravity holds you, keeps you grounded. You're safe here on Earth, in your room, in your bed. No matter how far we travel in tonight's stories, you'll always be right here, safe and warm. Take another deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Release any tension in your jaw, your forehead, your hands. We're about to visit places where cosmic horror lurks, where the unknown becomes terrifyingly known, and where humanity's place in the universe is called into question. But you're just listening. You're just here, safe and comfortable, letting these stories wash over you like dark waves, each one carrying you closer to the shore of sleep. The lights are dim. The world is quiet. And somewhere, out in the darkness between the stars, something ancient stirs. Let's begin. Dr. Sarah Chen hadn't slept properly in 47 hours. The research station orbiting Proxima Centauri b was small, designed for a crew of 6, though only 4 positions were currently filled. The walls were titanium white and sterile, and the constant hum of the life support systems created a white noise that should have been soothing but instead felt oppressive, like a held breath that never exhaled. She floated in the observation deck, watching the alien world rotate below. Proxima Centauri b, humanity's first extrasolar colony prospect, a rocky world, slightly larger than Earth, orbiting in the habitable zone of the nearest star to our Sun. It looked peaceful from up here. Reddish-brown continents, aquamarine oceans, swirling white clouds. Almost like home. Almost. You're still awake. Commander James Wu's voice crackled through her headset. Can't sleep, Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving the planet below. The signal's getting stronger. That was why she couldn't sleep. For 3 weeks, they'd been picking up a repeating signal from the planet's surface. Not random noise. Not geological interference. A pattern. A mathematical sequence. Prime numbers, transmitted at regular intervals on a frequency that shouldn't exist naturally. Someone, something, was down there. And they were trying to communicate. Martinez finished the analysis, James said. You should come to the comm center. You're still awake. Commander James Wu's voice crackled through her headset. Can't sleep, Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving the planet below. The signal's getting stronger. That was why she couldn't sleep. For 3 weeks, they'd been picking up a repeating signal from the planet's surface. Not random noise. Not geological interference. A pattern. A mathematical sequence. Prime numbers, transmitted at regular intervals on a frequency that shouldn't exist naturally. Someone, something, was down there. And they were trying to communicate. Martinez finished the analysis, James said. You should come to the comm center. Raphael pulled up a visualization on the main screen. The signal appeared as a waveform, peaks and valleys in a rhythmic pattern that they'd been studying for weeks. We assumed it was binary, on and off, 1 and 0. But there are 3 distinct signal states. It's trinary. And when you process it as such. He typed a command, and the waveform transformed into something else. Something that made Sarah's stomach drop. Oh my God, whispered Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka from her station in the corner. Is that a schematic? Raphael confirmed. It's a blueprint. For something biological. The image on the screen looked like DNA, but wrong. Instead of the familiar double helix, this had 7 interwoven strands, spiraling in a pattern that hurt to look at for too long, as if it existed in more dimensions than the screen could properly display. That's not possible, James said, but his voice carried no conviction. Raphael pulled up a visualization on the main screen. The signal appeared as a waveform, peaks and valleys in a rhythmic pattern that they'd been studying for weeks. We assumed it was binary, on and off, 1 and 0. But there are 3 distinct signal states. It's trinary. And when you process it as such. He typed a command, and the waveform transformed into something else. Something that made Sarah's stomach drop. Oh my God, whispered Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka from her station in the corner. Is that a schematic? Raphael confirmed. It's a blueprint. For something biological. The image on the screen looked like DNA, but wrong. Instead of the familiar double helix, this had 7 interwoven strands, spiraling in a pattern that hurt to look at for too long, as if it existed in more dimensions than the screen could properly display. That's not possible, James said, but his voice carried no conviction. And humanity did have that technology. Not here, not on this research station, but back on Earth. The automated biofabrication labs could synthesize organic compounds, build proteins from base elements, construct living organisms from digital templates. It was how they'd planned to seed Proxima Centauri B with Earth bacteria, preparing the environment for eventual colonization. We have to send this back to Earth Command, James said. This is beyond our pay grade. No, Sarah heard herself say. We can't. Everyone turned to look at her. Think about it, she continued, her mind racing. This signal has been broadcasting for 80 years. Long enough that it would have reached Earth decades ago. But we've only just detected it, and only because we're here, in orbit, with specialized equipment. That's not an accident. This message isn't meant for Earth. It's meant for whoever gets here first. You think it's a trap, Yuki said. I think it's a test, Sarah replied. And I think we're about to fail it. But it was too late. Commander Wu had already begun the upload process, sending the decoded signal back to Earth via quantum-entangled communication. The message would arrive instantly, traveling through the quantum foam of spacetime, bypassing the 4.24 light-years between them and home. The response came back within an hour. Earth Command was enthusiastic, excited even. This was exactly the kind of discovery that justified the trillion-dollar investment in interstellar exploration. They were already preparing the biofabrication labs. They were going to build it. They were going to create the thing from the blueprint. Sarah wanted to scream at them to stop, but what could she say? That she had a bad feeling? That something about this whole situation felt wrong? That wasn't science. That was superstition. That night, if you could call it night in the constant artificial lighting of the station, Sarah couldn't shake her unease. She floated in her sleeping pod, strapped loosely to prevent herself from drifting, staring at the curved ceiling inches from her face. The signal had changed. She'd been monitoring it obsessively, and 3 hours after they'd transmitted the decoded schematic to Earth, the signal from the planet's surface had shifted. The pattern was different now. Still trinary, still mathematical, but the sequence had altered. It almost looked like a countdown. Sarah unstrapped herself and made her way back to the comm center. The station was on night cycle, most of the crew asleep or at least pretending to be. Only Raphael was still there, hunched over his station, his face bathed in blue light. "You see it too," he said without looking up. "Yeah. It's accelerating. Whatever it's counting down to, it'll hit zero in approximately 17 hours. The same time Earth Command said they'd complete the fabrication." Raphael finally looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw her own fear reflected. "Sarah, what have we done?" They didn't have to wait long for an answer. 16 hours and 43 minutes later, Earth Command sent another transmission. There had been an incident at the fabrication lab. Something had gone wrong. The organism they'd created, the thing from the blueprint, wasn't dead. Wasn't passive. It had breached containment. The message was brief, clinical, but Sarah could read between the lines. Whatever they'd built, it was spreading. Fast. And then, at exactly 17 hours, the signal from Proxima Centauri B stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. For 3 weeks, that signal had been a constant presence, a mathematical heartbeat from an alien world. And now it was gone, cut off as suddenly as a severed artery. But something else started. The station's sensors began picking up movement on the planet's surface. Massive, coordinated movement. Structures rising from the ground, too large to be natural formations, too geometric to be random. And then the launch signatures, hundreds of them, all across the planet's surface. "They're coming," Yuki whispered, her voice breaking. Sarah watched the sensor display, watching those launch signatures arc up from the planet, achieving escape velocity, tracking toward them. Toward the station. Toward Earth. "It wasn't a message," she said, her voice hollow. "It wasn't a test. It was a key." Commander Wu's face had gone pale. "A key? They needed us to build it. They couldn't send the organism through space, too fragile, too much cosmic radiation. But they could send the blueprint. They could wait until someone intelligent enough arrived, someone with the technology to fabricate it from scratch. And then once it was built, once it was on Earth." Sarah's voice trailed off. "It unlocked them," Raphael finished. "We didn't just build their message. We built their invasion force." The objects from the planet's surface were getting closer now. The station's long-range cameras resolved them into shapes that made no sense, vessels that seemed to fold in on themselves, geometries that shouldn't be able to exist in three-dimensional space, surfaces that reflected no light and yet somehow shone with a sickly luminescence. Earth Command sent one final transmission. The thing they'd fabricated had spread across 3 continents in less than an hour. It was replicating exponentially, converting organic matter into more of itself. Cities were going dark. Communication networks were failing. And then Earth Command went silent. Sarah Chen floated in the observation deck, watching those alien vessels approach. Behind her, the rest of the crew scrambled to prepare some kind of defense, but what could 4 scientists in a research station do against something that had just conquered Earth? She looked down at Proxima Centauri B one last time. The reddish-brown continents, the aquamarine oceans, the swirling white clouds. It looked so peaceful. So innocent. But she knew better now. That planet wasn't a new home waiting to be colonized. It was a hunter, and the signal had been its lure. And humanity, in its arrogance, its desperate need to not be alone in the universe, had taken the bait. The first of the alien vessels reached the station. Sarah felt the hull shudder as something attached to the outer airlock. She heard screaming from the other sections, Yuki, Raphael, James, and then the screaming stopped. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about Earth. About blue skies and green forests and the smell of rain. About everything they'd lost because they'd answered a call from the stars. The observation deck door hissed open behind her. She didn't turn around. Didn't want to see what had come for her. Instead, she kept her eyes on Proxima Centauri b, watching it slowly rotate, and wondered how many other species had fallen for the same trap. How many other civilizations had decoded that signal, built that organism, and opened the door for their own annihilation. The last thing Sarah Chen saw before the darkness took her was her reflection in the observation window. But it wasn't quite her reflection anymore. The proportions were wrong. The angles didn't quite match. The first of the alien vessels reached the station. Sarah felt the hull shudder as something attached to the outer airlock. She heard screaming from the other sections, Yuki, Raphael, James, and then the screaming stopped. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about Earth. About blue skies and green forests and the smell of rain. About everything they'd lost because they'd answered a call from the stars. The observation deck door hissed open behind her. She didn't turn around. Didn't want to see what had come for her. Instead, she kept her eyes on Proxima Centauri b, watching it slowly rotate, and wondered how many other species had fallen for the same trap. How many other civilizations had decoded that signal, built that organism, and opened the door for their own annihilation. The last thing Sarah Chen saw before the darkness took her was her reflection in the observation window. But it wasn't quite her reflection anymore. The proportions were wrong. The angles didn't quite match. And behind her reflection, something that wore no face at all reached out with too many hands. Story 2, The Visitors in the Corn. The Mercer farm sat at the end of a dirt road in eastern Kansas, surrounded by 300 acres of corn that stretched to every horizon like a golden ocean frozen in time. Tom Mercer had worked that land for 37 years, just like his father before him, and his father before that. The corn grew tall and straight under his watch, the stalks reaching 8 feet high by late summer, rustling in the prairie wind with a sound like whispered secrets. But something was wrong with the corn this year. It started in late July. Tom was making his evening rounds, walking the rows like he did every night before sunset, checking for signs of blight or pest damage. The corn was at full height, the ears fat and heavy, tassels golden in the fading light. Everything looked perfect. Except for Section 12, the northeastern 40 acres. There, the corn had been flattened in a pattern. Not damaged by weather. Not trampled by animals. Flattened with precision, stalks bent at the base but not broken, all laid in the same direction, creating a geometric pattern that Tom's mind couldn't quite process. Circles within circles, connected by straight lines that terminated in triangular formations. He stood at the edge of it for a long time, the sunset bleeding red across the Kansas sky, and felt something cold settle into his stomach. Probably kids, his wife Margaret said when he told her about it over dinner. Their daughter Emma, home from college for the summer, looked up from her plate with interest. "Can I see it tomorrow?" Emma asked. Tom nodded slowly, but he was thinking about the corn. About how the stalks had been bent, all swirled in the same direction, as if something massive had pressed down on them from above. And he was thinking about something else, something he didn't want to say out loud because saying it would make him sound crazy. He was thinking about the lights he'd seen 3 nights ago, while he was up late with insomnia, looking out the bedroom window. Lights moving over the northeastern field. Not like aircraft lights. Not like anything he'd ever seen. Lights that moved in impossible ways, stopping and starting instantly, making right-angle turns at impossible speeds, descending into the corn and rising again without sound. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He lay in bed next to Margaret, listening to her steady breathing, and couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching the house. At 2:47 a.m., he got up and went to the window. The lights were back. 3 of them this time, hovering over the corn in a perfect triangular formation. They were bright, painfully bright, but somehow didn't illuminate the landscape around them. The light seemed to exist in a bubble, not spreading or diffusing, just hanging there in the darkness like holes punched through reality. Tom watched them for 17 minutes. They didn't move. Didn't change. just hovered, silent and impossible, above his corn. And then, in an instant, they shot straight up into the sky and were gone. The next morning, there was another pattern in the corn. This one was larger, more complex. Tom walked through it with Emma, and even she, a physics major at KU, couldn't explain it. "The stalks aren't broken," she said, running her hand along the bent corn. "The growth nodes aren't damaged. It's like they were gently pressed down, but the force required to do this to thousands of stalks simultaneously would be, I don't know, enormous." "You think someone's making these?" Tom asked. "Like those crop circles in England?" Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone and took a picture of the pattern from their vantage point at the center. "Dad, this pattern, it's not random. Look." She showed him the image on her phone. From ground level, it had seemed chaotic, but from above, it was clearly intentional. The circles and lines formed something recognizable, a diagram of the solar system. All 9 planets, including Pluto, which hadn't been classified as a planet in years, in their correct orbital positions. And something else, another circle beyond Pluto's orbit, in a location where no planet should be. "That's impossible," Tom said. "Yeah," Emma agreed. "It is." The lights came every night after that. Tom and Emma started staying up to watch them, sitting on the porch with thermoses of coffee, watching those impossible lights dance over the corn. Margaret thought they were both losing their minds but eventually joined them, if only to prove there was nothing there. She saw the lights too. "We should call someone," Margaret said on the 4th night. "The police. The Air Force. Someone." "And tell them what?" Tom replied. "That we've got UFOs making art in our corn. They'll think we're trying to drum up tourist business." But he knew they should report it. Knew they should tell someone. He just couldn't shake the feeling that calling attention to this, to whatever this was, would be a mistake. That these lights, these visitors, whoever or whatever they were, they'd chosen this farm for a reason. And drawing a crowd would make them leave. Or worse, make them stay. On the 7th night, the lights didn't stay above the corn. They descended. Tom, Margaret, and Emma watched from the porch as all 3 lights dropped down into the northeastern field and disappeared beneath the stalks. For a moment, there was only darkness and the sound of crickets. Then, the corn began to rustle. Something was moving through it. Moving toward the house. "Inside," Tom said, his voice tight. "Now." They backed into the house, Tom's hand on the screen door, ready to slam it shut. The rustling grew louder. Closer. The stalks at the edge of the field, maybe 50 yards from the house, began to sway in part. Tom saw a figure step out of the corn. It was shaped like a person, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Arms that hung past the knees. And the skin, if you could call it skin, seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, changing texture and color like an oil slick. It stood at the edge of the corn, perfectly still, and even though Tom couldn't make out any features on its face, he knew with absolute certainty that it was looking at him. At his family. Studying them. Then 2 more figures stepped out of the corn. These looked different, shorter, stockier, with too many joints in their arms and legs. They moved in a way that made Tom's brain hurt, their limbs bending at angles that shouldn't be possible. "Dad," Emma whispered. "Dad, what are they?" Tom couldn't answer. His voice had died in his throat. The 3 figures stood there for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Then, moving in perfect synchronization, they turned and walked back into the corn. The stalk swallowed them up, and the rustling faded away. The lights rose from the field a moment later and shot into the sky. None of them spoke for the rest of the night. They sat in the living room, all the lights on, curtains drawn, jumping at every sound. When the sun finally rose, they all felt foolish about their fear. In daylight, the farm looked normal. Safe. The corn swayed gently in the morning breeze, and birds sang from the fence posts. Tom went out to the northeastern field. There were no new patterns in the corn. But there were footprints. 3 sets of them, leading from the center of the latest crop formation to the edge of the field where the figures had stood. The prints were deep, pressed into the dry Kansas soil with more weight than any human would create. And they were wrong, too narrow, too long, with what looked like 3 large toes instead of 5. Tom knelt down and put his hand next to one of the prints. His hand looked tiny in comparison. That night, they loaded into Tom's truck and drove to Margaret's sister's place in Wichita. They didn't pack much. Didn't plan to be gone long. Just needed a night or 2 away from the farm, away from the corn, away from whatever was visiting them in the darkness. But the lights followed them. On the highway, about 20 miles from the farm, all 3 of them saw it at the same time. A bright light in the rearview mirror, coming up fast behind them. Too bright to be headlights. Moving too smoothly to be an aircraft. Tom pressed the accelerator. The old truck shuddered and groaned, pushing 70, then 80. The light kept pace effortlessly. "What do they want?" Margaret cried. The light pulled alongside them, matching their speed perfectly. Through the driver's side window, Tom could see it clearly now. It wasn't a craft. It was just light, pure and white and absolutely silent, keeping perfect pace with them on the empty highway. Then Emma screamed. Tom looked in the rearview mirror. Emma was staring out the back window, her face pale with terror. Tom looked too and saw that the highway behind them was gone. Not dark, not empty, gone. There was nothing there but a white void, an absence of reality, spreading toward them like a wave. The light beside them pulsed once, twice, 3 times. And then Tom was standing in the corn. He wasn't driving. He wasn't in the truck. He was standing in the northeastern field, in the middle of one of the crop formations, with no memory of how he'd gotten there. The sun was rising, but that couldn't be right. It had been night just a moment ago. They'd been driving, they'd been running. "Margaret," he called out. "Emma?" His voice echoed strangely in the corn. He found them at the edge of the field. Margaret was sitting on the ground, crying silently. Emma was standing, staring at her hands with an expression of confused horror. "What happened?" Tom asked, but even as he said it, he realized he didn't want to know the answer. "We were gone," Emma said softly. "We were gone for 3 days." Tom looked at his watch. It was Sunday morning. They'd left on Thursday night. 3 days of his life, just erased. The crop formations were different now. New patterns had appeared in the corn, dozens of them, covering nearly 100 acres. And these patterns weren't geometric or mathematical. They were organic, almost artistic. Shapes that looked like bones, or trees, or neural pathways. Or all of those things at once. Tom, Margaret, and Emma never talked about what happened during those 3 days. Not because they'd agreed to keep silent, but because none of them could remember. There was just a blank space in their memories, 3 days of missing time that their brains simply refused to acknowledge. But they all had the same dreams afterward. Dreams of standing in a room that was too large, with walls that curved in impossible ways. Dreams of being examined by hands that weren't quite hands, by eyes that weren't quite eyes. Dreams of information being poured into their minds, concepts and ideas and images that human language had no words for. And dreams of being changed. Emma was the first to notice it. She was in the shower one morning and saw something moving beneath her skin, a ripple that traveled up her arm like a wave. When she looked closely, she thought she could see patterns there, geometric designs just below the surface, too faint to photograph but definitely there. Margaret stopped needing to sleep. She would lie in bed next to Tom, but she was always awake, staring at the ceiling with eyes that didn't blink often enough. And Tom found that he could understand the corn. Could hear it, somehow, in a way he never had before. The rustling of the stalks wasn't random wind. It was communication. Information. The corn was talking, and now Tom could listen. They sold the farm in October. Moved to the city, to a place with no corn, no fields, no open sky where lights could dance. But it didn't matter. Whatever had been done to them during those 3 missing days, it was permanent. Emma dropped out of college. The physics she'd studied all her life didn't make sense anymore. She saw equations differently now, saw patterns in quantum mechanics that her professors insisted couldn't exist. She tried to explain what she was seeing, and they suggested she take a semester off. For her mental health. Margaret got a job in an office building downtown, 43 floors of concrete and glass and fluorescent lights. She never mentioned that she didn't need to eat anymore. Never mentioned that her reflection in the bathroom mirror sometimes moved a fraction of a second before she did. Tom took up painting, even though he'd never held a brush before in his life. He painted the same thing over and over, the northeastern field, full of corn, with lights descending from above. Sometimes, late at night, he would look at his paintings and see details he didn't remember adding. Faces in the corn, figures standing at the edges. And sometimes, the figures would be in different positions than they'd been the day before. The dreams continued, for all of them. Dreams of the room. Dreams of the examination. Dreams of being told something important, something vital, something that would explain everything. But when they woke, they could never quite remember what it was. Only that somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between the stars, something had noticed them. Had chosen them. Had changed them. And now, marked and altered and unable to forget what they couldn't remember, they were waiting. Waiting for the lights to come back. Waiting for whatever came next. Story 3, The Object Beneath Antarctica. The subglacial lake lay 2 miles beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, sealed away from the world for 15 million years. Dr. James Whittaker stood in the drilling station, watching the monitor as the bore finally punched through the last meter of ice. 15 years of planning. 8 years of drilling. And now, finally, they were through. The probe's cameras showed nothing but blackness and occasional particles drifting past the lights like snow. The lake was enormous, 30 miles long, 8 miles wide, potentially 1,000 feet deep. A hidden ocean beneath the ice, isolated from Earth's surface since before humans evolved. Depth 900 feet, Sarah reported. No contact with the bottom yet. They had a theory, everyone on the team did, though they'd only discussed it in hushed voices over coffee late at night. This lake might contain life. Organisms that had evolved in complete isolation for millions of years. Bacteria, maybe. Extremophiles adapted to crushing pressure and perpetual darkness. But James had another theory, one he hadn't shared with anyone. One based on the anomalous magnetic readings they detected before drilling. Readings that suggested something large and metallic sat on the lake floor. Something that shouldn't be there. Depth 950 feet, Sarah said. 975. 1,000, contact. We've reached the bottom. The probe settled onto the lake floor with a soft thud that echoed through the hydrophones. The camera showed silt, disturbed by the probe's descent, settling back down in slow motion. Run a full sensor sweep, James ordered. The probe began its programmed sequence, mapping the lake floor with sonar, taking water samples, measuring temperature and pressure and chemical composition. Standard stuff. The data began streaming back up the cable, and Sarah's eyes went wide. James, you need to see this. The sonar image made no sense. The lake floor wasn't flat or gently curved like they'd expected. There was a structure down there. Massive. Regular. Geometric. They directed the probe toward the anomaly, moving it slowly across the lake floor, following the sonar map. The journey took 40 minutes. When the structure finally came into view on the cameras, James felt his hands go numb. It was a perfect sphere. 500 feet in diameter, resting on the ancient lakebed, covered in millennia of sediment but still visible. And it was clearly artificial. The surface was too smooth, too perfect. And there were markings on it, patterns that could have been writing or circuitry or something else entirely. How did this get here? Sarah asked. This lake has been sealed for 15 million years. Maybe it was here first, James said quietly. Maybe the ice came later. They held a conference call with their funding agencies and the international Antarctic treaty organizations. The discovery was enormous, proof of an ancient, advanced civilization, or possibly something extraterrestrial. Plans were immediately made to send a manned submersible down to the object. To physically examine it. To understand what it was and where it had come from. James argued against it. Something about the sphere bothered him, the way it sat there on the lakebed, perfectly preserved, radiating heat after all this time. It felt less like a discovery and more like a trap, but he was overruled. The scientific opportunity was too great. The questions too important. They had a small submersible on site, originally intended for emergency ice cap breach scenarios. It could hold 2 people and operate at the pressures found in the subglacial lake. James volunteered to pilot it. Sarah volunteered to accompany him. The descent took 3 hours. The submersible was cramped, cold despite its heating elements, and filled with the constant groaning of the pressure hull adjusting to the crushing weight of water above them. James kept his eyes on the instruments, watching their depth increase meter by meter. Sarah was quiet beside him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the control panels. "Are you scared?" she finally asked. "Yes," James admitted. "You?" "Terrified. But more curious than scared, I think." The sphere appeared in their lights suddenly, looming out of the darkness like a moon rising. Up close, it was even more imposing. The surface wasn't smooth after all, it was covered in intricate patterns, geometric designs that seemed to shift and change as their lights moved across them. "I'm seeing visual artifacts," Sarah said. "The patterns, they're making my eyes water." James saw it too. The designs had a hypnotic quality, drawing the eye, making it hard to focus. He forced himself to look away, to focus on positioning the submersible. They landed on the lakebed 20 feet from the sphere. Through the thick viewing port, they could see it clearly now. The patterns on its surface were moving. Actually moving, flowing like liquid metal, constantly reconfiguring. "It knows we're here," Sarah whispered. Before James could respond, something changed. The water around them suddenly got warmer, not by a little, but dramatically. The external temperature gauge jumped from near freezing to 15 degrees Celsius in a matter of seconds. And the sphere began to open. A seam appeared on the surface, a line of light cutting through the patterns, widening slowly. James's instinct was to pull back, to surface immediately, but he found he couldn't move. Neither could Sarah. They sat frozen in their seats, watching that opening grow, revealing an interior that glowed with a soft, blue-white luminescence. "James," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I can hear something." He could too. Not through the hydrophones, but directly in his mind. A sound that wasn't quite a sound, more like a pressure, a presence, pushing against the inside of his skull, and with it came images. Flashes of things he couldn't quite understand. Vast distances. Impossible geometries. Beings that existed in states between solid and liquid and energy. The opening in the sphere was fully dilated now, perhaps 30 feet across. And something was emerging from it. T looked like light at first, a tendril of that blue-white glow extending out into the water. But as it got closer to the submersible, James could see it was more substantial than light. It had texture. Structure. It moved with purpose and intelligence. The tendril touched their hull. The submersible's lights flickered. The instruments went haywire, needles spinning, digital displays showing impossible readings. And then James felt it, a presence in his mind, vast and ancient and utterly inhuman, examining him the way he might examine a bacterium under a microscope. He saw things, remembered things. Except they weren't his memories. He saw the sphere arriving on Earth. Saw it descending through an atmosphere that looked wrong, too much methane, not enough oxygen. Saw it settling onto the ground in what would eventually become Antarctica but was then a tropical landmass covered in strange plants and creatures that wouldn't evolve for millions of years. He saw the sphere's purpose, a seed. A probe. Sent from somewhere unimaginably distant to catalog, to study, to wait. To wait for intelligence to evolve. And now intelligence had found it. The presence withdrew from James's mind as suddenly as it had entered, leaving him gasping and disoriented. Sarah was crying, he realized. Tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking. "We have to go," he managed to say. "Now." But the submersible wouldn't respond. The controls were dead. They were trapped, sitting on the lake bed, while that blue-white tendril of light and matter coiled around their hull like a serpent examining its prey. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. James couldn't tell. Time felt wrong down here, elastic and unreliable. He and Sarah sat in silence, watching the tendril, watching the sphere, waiting for something to happen. And then, finally, it released them. The tendril withdrew. The opening in the sphere began to close. The water temperature dropped back to near freezing. And their instruments came back online. James didn't hesitate. He fired the ballast tanks and they began to rise, climbing through the darkness toward the drill hole 2 miles above. Neither he nor Sarah spoke during the ascent. What could they say? How could they explain what they'd experienced? They surfaced 6 hours later, exhausted and traumatized. The team helped them out of the submersible, asking excited questions about what they'd seen, what they'd found. James and Sarah looked at each other and seemed to reach an unspoken agreement. "Equipment malfunction," James said. "We had to abort before we reached the sphere." It was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. Easier than trying to explain the impossible thing they'd witnessed. The team was disappointed but understanding. These things happened in extreme environments. That night, James couldn't sleep. He stood in the station's observation window, looking out at the Antarctic darkness, and tried to process what had happened. The sphere was still down there. Still waiting. And now it knew that humanity had reached it. The question was, what would it do with that knowledge? He got his answer 3 days later. Chenwei was the first to notice the changes. The ice around the drill hole was melting. Not from surface heat, the Antarctic winter had arrived in full force, and temperatures were plummeting. The ice was melting from below. From the lake, the sphere was heating up. Within a week, the melt had spread over a 1/4-mile radius. The drill hole became a shaft of liquid water surrounded by unstable ice. The station began to tilt as its foundation softened. "We need to evacuate," James told the team. "Now." But it was too late. The Antarctic winter had sealed them in. No planes could land. No helicopters could fly. They were stuck. Images of Earth in different eras. The Precambrian, when this sphere had first arrived. The Cambrian explosion of life. The rise and fall of species. The eventual evolution of humans. It had been watching all along, waiting patiently through the eons for intelligence to emerge and find it. And now the wait was over. More spheres were waking up. The images showed them, dozens, hundreds, scattered across the Earth in places humans had never looked. Deep ocean trenches. Volcanic vents. The Earth's mantle. All of them beginning to heat up. All of them rising. What do they want? Sarah asked, though she was really asking the presence in all their minds. The answer came not in words but in understanding. The spheres weren't weapons. Weren't invaders. They were more like archaeologists. Sent here billions of years ago by a civilization so advanced, so far beyond human comprehension, that their goals were incomprehensible. They had seeded the galaxy with these probes, waiting for intelligence to arise on any world that could support it. And when that intelligence reached a certain level, when it could find the probes, could communicate with them, the probes would activate. Would report back. Would summon their creators. "Oh God," Chenwei whispered. "We've triggered something. Some kind of signal." James understood then. The sphere wasn't the danger. The sphere was just the beacon. And somewhere out there in the vast darkness of space, something ancient and powerful had just received a message, intelligent life confirmed on Sol 3. Come home. The sphere remained hovering over the ice for 3 more days, and then, without warning, it shot straight up into the sky. James watched it go, a point of light ascending faster than any human-made craft could move, punching through the atmosphere and disappearing into space. Weeks? Years? Decades? Or maybe they were already here, had been here all along, and the spheres were just the first layer of an observation system humanity was only beginning to understand. Sarah called him sometimes. They never talked about Antarctica, not directly. But he could hear it in her voice, the same waiting quality that he felt. The sense that they'd opened a door that could never be closed. That humanity had stepped onto a stage it didn't even know existed, performing for an audience that had been watching since before the first fish crawled onto land. The other spheres continued to rise. Reports came in from around the world, strange phenomena in the Mariana Trench, anomalous readings from deep Earth seismic stations, unexplained heat signatures in subduction zones. The awakening had begun. And in the depths of space, something vast and ancient was turning its attention toward Earth, drawn by a signal that had been traveling at light speed for 3 weeks, carrying a message 15 million years in the making: we are here. We are awake. We are ready. James stood at his window one night, watching the stars, and wondered if humanity would survive what came next. If the things that had sent those spheres were benevolent, curious, indifferent, or something else entirely, something for which humanity had no frame of reference. He suspected he would find out soon enough. They all would. Story 4, The Hitchhiker on Route 375. Route 375 stretched across the Nevada desert like a ribbon of asphalt connecting nowhere to nowhere. They called it the extraterrestrial highway, a nickname that started as a joke but that locals had embraced with a kind of ironic pride. Signs along the road warned of alien crossings. Gift shops sold little green men and tinfoil hats. It was all very tongue-in-cheek, very American, very safe. Marcus Webb didn't believe in aliens. He was driving the route at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, headed back to Las Vegas after a consulting job in Rachel. The night was absolutely clear, stars blazing overhead with an intensity you only got in the deep desert, far from city lights. No moon. Just stars and the endless dark and the cone of his headlights cutting through the night. He'd been driving for 40 minutes when he saw the figure on the side of the road. Marcus's first thought was confusion. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m.? The nearest town was 30 miles back. There was nothing out here but sagebrush and sand and the occasional coyote. His second thought was that he should keep driving. Don't stop for hitchhikers in the middle of the desert at night. That was basic common sense. But as his headlights swept over the figure, he caught a glimpse of a woman, or what looked like a woman, in a white dress, standing perfectly still at the roadside. Something about her posture, her stillness, made Marcus's foot move from the accelerator to the brake. He told himself it was the humane thing to do. If someone was stranded out here, they could die of exposure or dehydration. He was just being a good Samaritan. He told himself that, but part of him, some deep, instinctive part, was screaming at him to keep driving. He pulled over anyway. The woman didn't move as he came to a stop. She just stood there, facing the road, that white dress fluttering slightly in the desert wind. Marcus rolled down the passenger window. "You okay?" he called out. "Need a ride?" She turned to face him, and in the glow of his dashboard lights, Marcus got his first good look at her. She was beautiful in an unsettling way, features that were just slightly too perfect, too symmetrical. Eyes that reflected the dashboard light like an animal's. "Yes," she said. Her voice was flat, without inflection. "I need transport to Las Vegas." Something about the phrasing struck Marcus as odd. Not "I need a ride" or "Can you take me to Vegas?" But "I need transport," like she was reading from a script written by someone who had learned English from a textbook. "Hop in," Marcus heard himself say. She opened the door and slid into the passenger seat with movements that were too smooth, too fluid. She didn't settle into the seat the way a person normally would, she just suddenly existed there, perfectly still, facing forward. Marcus pulled back onto the highway, and neither of them spoke for several minutes. He kept stealing glances at her. The white dress looked expensive, formal, not the sort of thing you'd wear hitchhiking in the desert. Her hands rested in her lap, perfectly still. She didn't fidget. Didn't adjust her position. Didn't blink. So, Marcus finally said, because the silence was becoming oppressive, "What were you doing out here?" "Observing," she said. "Observing what?" "Everything." Marcus laughed nervously. "That's pretty vague." She turned to look at him, and her eyes caught the dashboard light again. For just a moment, Marcus could have sworn they were larger than human eyes should be. Too large for her face. But when he blinked, they looked normal. "What is your designation?" she asked. You mean my name?" "Marcus. Marcus Webb." "Marcus Webb," she repeated, as if testing the words. "You are traveling from Rachel to Las Vegas. You perform technical consultation services. You are unmarried. You live alone." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How do you know that?" "I observe," she said simply. "You observe people's life stories just by looking at them?" "Yes." This was getting weird. Marcus started to regret picking her up. "What's your name?" She was quiet for a long moment. "You may call me Eve." "Eve. Okay. And where were you before I picked you up, Eve?" "Above." "Above? Like, in the mountains?" "Above," she repeated, and pointed up. Through the windshield. At the stars. Marcus laughed again, but it came out high and strained. "Right. Very funny. Look, are you on something? Do you need medical attention?" "I require nothing. I am observing." "You keep saying that." "Observing what exactly?" She turned those two large eyes on him again. "You. Your species. Your behavior patterns. Your decision-making processes. Your capacity for compassion." She paused. "You stopped for me. Most would not have. This is notable." "Most people would stop for someone stranded in the desert," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure that was true. "No," Eve said. "Most would not. Fear overrides compassion in 93% of your species. You are the 7%. This makes you interesting." Marcus's mouth had gone dry. "I think maybe you should tell me what's really going on here. I am being truthful. I am from above. I am here to observe." "You stopped. Now I am observing you." "You're saying you're, what, an alien? From outer space?" "That is an acceptable terminology." "You keep saying that." "Observing what exactly?" She turned those two large eyes on him again. "You. Your species. Your behavior patterns. Your decision-making processes. Your capacity for compassion." She paused. "You stopped for me. Most would not have. This is notable." "Most people would stop for someone stranded in the desert," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure that was true. "No," Eve said. "Most would not. Fear overrides compassion in 93% of your species. You are the 7%. This makes you interesting." Marcus's mouth had gone dry. "I think maybe you should tell me what's really going on here. I am being truthful. I am from above. I am here to observe." "You stopped. Now I am observing you." "You're saying you're, what, an alien? From outer space?" "That is an acceptable terminology." Marcus should have been laughing. Should have been pulling over and kicking her out of the car. But something in her absolute stillness, her unwavering gaze, the slightly wrong way she moved and spoke, it was all adding up to something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Prove it," he said. Eve tilted her head at an angle that was just slightly too far to be comfortable. "You wish for proof of my origin?" "Yeah. Show me something. Do something that proves you're not just some crazy person I picked up in the desert." "Very well." She raised one hand and pointed out the windshield, up at the sky. Observe. Marcus looked up and nearly drove off the road. The stars were moving. Not drifting slowly the way they normally did as the Earth rotated. Moving. Swirling in patterns that made his brain hurt to watch, forming shapes and symbols that he somehow understood even though he'd never seen them before. Mathematical concepts. Astronomical data. Information pouring directly into his mind through his eyes. What the hell, he managed to gasp. You asked for proof, Eve said calmly. The stars are not actually moving. I am manipulating your visual cortex to make you perceive them as moving. This is a demonstration of our capabilities. The stars stopped swirling and returned to their normal positions. Marcus pulled over to the side of the road, his heart hammering, hands shaking. What are you? He whispered. I told you. An observer. We have been watching your species for millennia. Studying you. Learning from you. You are fascinating. Violent and compassionate in equal measure. Brilliant and foolish. Creative and destructive. Why are you telling me this? Because you stopped. Because you represent the better aspect of your species. And because. She paused, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed her perfect face. Because we are leaving soon. Our observation period is ending. And I wanted to understand one more thing before we go. What thing? What it feels like to be you. To be human. To experience time linearly. To know that you will die. To feel fear and hope and loneliness. She looked at him with those two large eyes. I have been observing for 200 of your years, and I still do not understand these things. Not truly. Marcus's breathing had slowed. The initial terror was fading, replaced by a strange kind of awe. You're really from another world? Yes. And there are more of you? Many more. Observing many more of you. We are everywhere. We have always been everywhere. What happens when your observation period ends? Eve was quiet for a long moment. That depends on what we report. On what we've learned. Your species is at a critical juncture. You are developing technologies that could either elevate you or destroy you. We have been tasked with determining which outcome is more likely. And what have you determined? I am uncertain. Your species shows tremendous potential. But also tremendous capacity for self-destruction. You are unpredictable. They sat there on the side of Route 375, engine idling, stars blazing overhead. Marcus felt like he was in a dream. This couldn't be real, but it felt real. More real than anything he'd ever experienced. Will I remember this? He asked. After you leave, will I remember talking to you? Do you wish to remember? Marcus thought about it. A real answer to the universe's greatest question, are we alone? Most people would give anything for this knowledge. But something about the weight of it, the implications, made him hesitate. Yes, he finally said. I want to remember. Eve nodded slowly. Then you will. But know that this knowledge comes with a burden. You will spend the rest of your life knowing that we are here, watching, and that most of your species remains ignorant. You will want to tell others, but they will not believe you. This knowledge will isolate you. I don't care. I want to know the truth. Very well. Eve reached out and touched his forehead with one finger. Marcus felt something shift in his mind. Information flooding in, not just about Eve and her species, but about everything. About the galaxy teeming with life. About civilizations that rose and fell millions of years before humans evolved. About the watchers who observed it all, documenting and cataloging and trying to understand the great mystery of consciousness itself. He saw Earth from above, covered in millions of invisible observers, studying humanity like scientists studying bacteria in a petri dish. He saw the moment when humans first split the atom, and how that achievement had elevated them to a new level of interest. He saw possible futures, some bright, some dark, all uncertain. And then the information stopped, and he was just Marcus again, sitting in his car on Route 375, hand pressed to his forehead where Eve had touched him. Except Eve wasn't there anymore. The passenger seat was empty. Marcus looked around wildly. The door hadn't opened. She hadn't gotten out. She was just gone. He sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Trying to decide if it had been real or if he'd had some kind of psychotic break. But he could still feel the information in his mind, still see those images of Earth covered in observers, still remember every word Eve had spoken. It was real. It had to be real. Marcus pulled back onto the highway and drove the rest of the way to Las Vegas in silence. The city appeared on the horizon around 4 a.m., a glow of artificial light pushing back against the desert darkness. All those people down there, going about their lives, completely unaware that they were being watched. Studied. Judged. He made it to his apartment as the sun was rising. Didn't sleep. Just sat by the window, looking up at the sky, knowing that somewhere up there, Eve and her people were watching. Would always be watching. And someday soon, they would make their report. Would decide humanity's fate based on what they'd observed during their centuries of surveillance. Marcus thought about the fact that he'd stopped for Eve. That he represented the 7% who chose compassion over fear. He wondered if that would be enough. If humanity's capacity for kindness could outweigh its capacity for cruelty in whatever cosmic calculus Eve's people were using. He never found out. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Life went on. Marcus went back to work, paid his bills, existed in the normal human world. But every night, he looked up at the stars and remembered. Remembered that the universe was full of life. Full of intelligences beyond human comprehension, full of observers who had been watching humanity since before history began. And he remembered Eve's final words, spoken directly into his mind as she vanished from his car. We hope you survive. We would very much like to see what you become. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even encouragement. It was just an observation, cool, clinical, detached. But it was something. And in the vast, uncaring universe, Marcus had learned, sometimes something was all you got. Story 5, The Children of the Lights. The town of Millbrook sat in the middle of Vermont, population 3,200, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and nothing interesting ever happened. Sarah Mitchell had lived there her whole life, 38 years of PTA meetings and book clubs and the same faces at the grocery store every week. That's why she noticed when the children started changing. It began with the Henderson twins, Chloe and Emma, 8 years old. They'd always been rambunctious, loud, constantly getting into trouble at school. But one Monday in October, they came to school different. Quiet. Calm. They sat at their desks with perfect posture, completed their assignments without being asked, and spoke only when spoken to. It's like someone replaced them with pod people, joked Sarah's friend Beth, who taught second grade. Sarah laughed at the time. But then more children started changing. Tommy Reeves, 6 years old, went from barely reading at a kindergarten level to devouring chapter books in a single weekend. His mother, confused but delighted, bragged about it at the coffee shop. It's like someone flipped a switch in his brain, she said. The Martinez boy, always sick with one ailment or another, suddenly recovered. No more asthma. No more allergies. His pediatrician was baffled but pleased. Within 2 weeks, 12 children in Millbrook had undergone similar transformations. Behavior improvements, sudden leaps in intellectual capacity. Mysterious recoveries from chronic conditions. The parents were thrilled. The teachers were amazed. Sarah was terrified. She'd noticed something the others hadn't, or maybe they'd noticed but didn't want to think about it. The changed children all shared certain traits beyond their improvements. They didn't play like children anymore. During recess, instead of running and screaming and playing tag, they stood in small groups, speaking quietly to each other. When Sarah got close enough to overhear, she couldn't understand what they were saying. The words were English, but the sentence structures were wrong, too complex, discussing concepts that 8-year-olds shouldn't be able to comprehend. And their eyes. All of the changed children had the same look in their eyes, distant, focused on things no one else could see. Sarah's daughter, Lily, was 9. So far, she hadn't changed. She was still the same energetic, slightly rebellious kid she'd always been. But Sarah watched her like a hawk, terrified that one morning she'd wake up to find her daughter transformed into one of those quiet, perfect children. "Mom, you're being weird," Lily complained as Sarah checked on her for the 3rd time that night. "I'm just making sure you're okay, honey." "I'm fine. You're the one acting weird." Sarah tried to laugh it off, but that night, she barely slept. She lay in bed, listening to the house settle, and thought about all those changed children. What had happened to them? Where had the real children gone? The answer came 3 days later, when Sarah saw the lights. She was driving home late from a parent-teacher conference. The road out of town wound through dense forest, and it was past 10 p.m., dark and quiet. She was thinking about the conference, about how many parents had praised their children's recent improvements, how excited everyone was about this mysterious cognitive leap, when she saw the glow through the trees. At first, she thought it was a house fire. The light was too bright, too intense. But as she drove closer, she realized the light was coming from above. From something in the sky. Sarah pulled over and got out of her car, her heart pounding. Through the tree canopy, she could see them, 3 lights, hovering in a perfect triangular formation, silent and impossibly bright. They weren't moving. Just hanging there in the night sky, casting long shadows through the forest. And beneath them, barely visible in the harsh glare, Sarah saw children. Dozens of them, standing in a clearing off the road, faces turned up toward the lights. Not moving. Not speaking. Just standing there, bathed in that unnatural glow. Sarah recognized some of them. The Henderson twins. Tommy Reeves. The Martinez boy. All the children who had changed. And others too, children she knew hadn't changed yet, including. "Oh God," Sarah whispered. "Lily." Her daughter was there, standing at the edge of the group, her face illuminated by that horrible light. As Sarah watched, frozen with fear, Lily took a step forward. Then another. Moving toward the center of the clearing, toward the other children, toward the lights. Sarah ran. She crashed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at her clothes and face, shouting Lily's name. But either Lily couldn't hear her or couldn't respond. She just kept walking, eyes fixed on the lights above. Sarah burst into the clearing and grabbed Lily's arm, pulling her backward. Her daughter's skin was cold, impossibly cold, and for a moment, Lily didn't even seem to notice Sarah was there. Her eyes stayed fixed on the lights, empty and distant. "Lily!" Sarah screamed, shaking her. "Lily, look at me." Finally, Lily blinked. Her eyes focused on Sarah's face, and for just a moment, Sarah saw recognition there. Saw fear. "Mom?" Lily whispered. "Mom, I can't, they're showing me." But then her eyes went distant again, and she tried to pull away, tried to go back to the other children. Sarah didn't think. She just grabbed Lily, threw her over her shoulder despite being far too big for that, and ran. Ran back through the forest, back to her car, while behind her the lights pulsed brighter and brighter and she could swear she heard something, not a sound, but a pressure in her mind, telling her to stop, to bring the child back, to let the process complete. She threw Lily into the car, started the engine, and drove. Didn't stop until they were home, doors locked, every light in the house turned on. Lily sat on the couch, shaking and crying. "Mom, what happened?" "I was in bed, and then I was walking through the woods, and I couldn't stop, couldn't control my legs, and there were voices in my head telling me things, showing me things." "It's okay," Sarah said, though it absolutely wasn't. "You're safe now. I've got you." But she knew it wasn't over. Whatever those lights were, whatever they were doing to the children, they wouldn't stop just because Sarah had interfered. They'd come back for Lily. They'd complete what they'd started. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat by Lily's bed, watching her daughter sleep, watching for any signs of change. And she made phone calls to parents of other children, asking if their kids had been acting strangely lately. Had they been sleepwalking? Had they been gone from their beds at night? Most parents assured her everything was fine. Their children were perfect. Better than perfect. So smart now, so well behaved. Why would Sarah worry about that? But a few parents, 3, to be exact, admitted that yes, they'd found their children's beds empty on occasion. Had found them returned before morning, with no memory of where they'd been. I thought she was sleepwalking, said Mrs. Henderson. The doctor said it was normal for twins to develop sleep disorders around this age. Sarah knew better. She organized a meeting, just the 4 parents whose children hadn't fully changed yet. They met at Sarah's house, speaking in whispers while the children slept upstairs. What are we saying here? Asked Mr. Chen, father of 6-year-old Danny. That aliens are abducting our kids. I saw the lights, Sarah insisted. I saw all those children standing beneath them. Something is happening to them. Some kind of programming, but the children who've changed are fine, Mrs. Henderson argued. They're healthier. Smarter. Maybe whatever's happening is good? They're not our children anymore, Sarah said quietly. Haven't you noticed? They don't play. Don't laugh. Don't act like kids. They're like perfect little robots programmed to look human. The parents fell silent, because they had noticed. They just hadn't wanted to admit it. They decided to keep watch that night. All 4 families would stay awake, would monitor their children, would prevent them from sleepwalking, or whatever it actually was, to the lights. Sarah sat in a chair outside Lily's room, coffee in hand, determined not to let her daughter out of sight. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. Then 2 a.m. At 2:47 a.m., every light in the house went out. Sarah jumped up, her coffee cup clattering to the floor. The darkness was absolute, complete, not even starlight coming through the windows. Lily, she called out, fumbling for her daughter's door. The door opened before she reached it. Lily stood in the doorway, silhouetted against a soft blue glow that seemed to be coming from her bedroom window. But her eyes were open and empty, and she was walking, moving past Sarah with that same measured, controlled gait Sarah had seen in the forest. No, Sarah said, grabbing for her daughter. But her hands passed through Lily like she was made of smoke. Not really there. Not really solid. Sarah watched, helpless and horrified, as Lily walked down the stairs and out the front door, which opened by itself. Outside, the street was filled with children. All the children of Millbrook, walking in perfect silence toward the forest, toward the lights that pulsed above the trees. Sarah tried to follow, but she couldn't move. Something held her in place, not physically, but in her mind, telling her to stay, to watch, to understand. And then she heard it. A voice that wasn't a voice, speaking directly into her thoughts, do not fear. We are not harming them. We are improving them. Who are you? Sarah demanded, though her lips didn't move. We are the gardeners. We have tended this world for millennia, guiding, shaping, improving. Your species has potential. Great potential. But you need help. Your children will be that help. They will grow up wiser, kinder, more capable. They will lead humanity to its best future. By turning them into something else? By taking away what makes them human.